One of them actually locked herself up in the toilet for an hour crying. That journalist was from India because she writes a lot about health and climate change, and she felt that the entire kind of conference was kind of a big letdown. Kempuda. My name is Nadia Rosli. I am project director with Internews in Malaysia, and I was at COP26 last year in Glasgow. I was part of the Climate Change Media Partnership Program by Internews Earth Journalism Network and also the Stanley Center for Peace and Security. Basically, COP is Conference of Parties by UNFCCC, where it's an international convention where they bring delegates, state leaders, nation leaders to this conference, where it happens every year. It's been happening for the past 3 decades, and it's the only kind of global summit that talks about the climate crisis, and it gets countries to basically review their climate action progress, and they also have negotiations on certain agreements that the countries need to implement for their climate actions.
That COP26 is a failure. It should be obvious that we cannot solve a crisis with the same methods that got us into it in the first place.
I'm talking about the most vulnerable people on the planet. They came here expecting to hear something being done about loss and damage, and all we got is a dialogue to talk more about it. That's absolutely unacceptable.
Some people regarded COP as a failure, some regarded it as a success. It really depends who you ask, it's up for debate. There were certain things that a lot of the delegates were disappointed about. This was mostly on loss and damage. The richer countries couldn't commit to the $100 billion that they pledged for countries who are facing the impacts of climate change directly. A lot of the language was watered down. I felt that, governments are not taking bold action when they should be urgently, considering that we are going to see a rise in warmer temperatures across the world, and it's really scary based on the IPCC report. By 2040 we are going to hit that 1.5 degrees. We are left wondering why aren't governments taking more urgent action? But as a journalist from developing countries, one of them actually locked herself up in the toilet for an hour crying, and she felt that the entire kind of conference was kind of a big letdown because she talks directly with people impacted by air pollution, people who are dying, and she felt that a lot of the discussions or the negotiations didn't really think of vulnerable people who are already impacted by climate change. But there were also certain things that people considered as wins. It does showcase that the world is interconnected. The EU and more developed countries can basically support, especially the global south, in terms of technology transfer, in terms of providing additional climate financing. I think Malaysians need to understand that even though COP is such a high-level event, it impacts every one of us, because what they discuss at this conference will literally translate into local policies, local action. We need to kind of invest also to understand what they discussed about, because we need to also push for our decision makers to implement, more sustainable kind of infrastructure projects. And I think transparency and accountability is also an important factor in COP. So this was a very important conference for the journalists to report on and ensure that their authorities are really following up on the pledges and commitments made at COP every year. So humans are the main drivers of climate change, and I think we need to kind of push back on the idea that climate change is an individual responsibility. There needs to be structural change as well. The government needs to set clear policies to make sure that businesses are also doing their part in this climate crisis. So everyone has a role to play, but I think for COP, it needs to be clear that that is the government's role. What are they conveying at an international platform? And Malaysians should also have a say on what's being communicated at COP as well.
This roundtable discussion was carried out in 2021. It was a historically big engagement. We had about 4,000 people from industry engaging. So the whole idea was to try to collect feedback from industry on how Malaysia could get on this low carbon pathway. And industry was actually very positive towards going in this direction. So we can do a lot, but it's actually also important that governance and the policies and the regulations also point in that direction. If you rely on just the market to do this on its own, or people out of goodwill, it's probably not going to happen. I mean, we need a bit of a sort of steering from the government. To me, the most promising sign we see from the government is that the Prime Minister of Malaysia has repeated several times that Malaysia needs to go carbon neutral by 2050. So if that's really the intention, then we need to really get going fast.
We don't normally talk between those different areas. All the different COP where people in different countries are talking to each other and trying to come up with solutions. And climate governments in Malaysia have come up with these various reports asking different layers of government to do different things on climate change. It's a first step, and I'm sure there'll be many, many such engagements. Local government, state government, federal government have to work together in a more seamless manner between all those different parts of government, and also across the corporate sector and to civil society. This is just something that's going to have to be done.
When people say COP is not useful, just take it with a pinch of salt. They may be doing something positive, but they are not doing enough. Global problems are normally handled by a convention. And then once you pass a convention, everybody agrees, then everybody got to sit down again through the conference of parties, and you have to compare how have you progressed. That's what the international community is doing through COP. Climate change is about action. If you don't have the action, I'm afraid the future may not be promising.
Obviously, in order to tackle the climate emergency, we have to bring all stakeholders to work together closely. A lot of good decisions have been taken, and we have set targets in COP26. So what we absolutely need, and given the climate emergency, is to have all these commitments and pledges, a way to implement them. For me, climate change action and reaction starts already from schools. We need to educate everyone, but the governments need to create the conditions to do that. My hope is, and as the EU ambassador to Malaysia, that once the decisions are taken in COP27, that we can work very closely with the government to see how we can implement the pledges that the government of Malaysia is going to take in COP27. We stand by to help at any time.
The important thing about climate change is we want to see results, and that results must be real results. On the 10th will be the COP27. Let's see how's the trajectory of the discussion, and hopefully there will be more concrete action.
8 out of 10 countries in Southeast Asia now have net zero targets, up from just 2 a year ago.
Governments and businesses have taken huge strides to transition into a greener future.
New analysis seen by the BBC suggests the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement are coming within reach.
We have every reason in the world to act. We can't wait until tomorrow. This is our only home. You can choose today to make a world of difference.